All right, so we're back for another deep dive. And this time, we're going to be looking at the white working class in America.
Okay.
Specifically, folks with Appalachian roots.
Sounds good.
So we're going to be using J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy.
Right.
And looking at how the book kind of tries to paint a picture that goes beyond just the stereotypes that we often hear.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating look at the challenges and the sort of cultural landscape of this community.
Right.
And especially the German edition of the book really digs into
Oh, yeah.
some of the, connections to populism and economic anxieties, which is really relevant.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you hear that term hillbilly and you immediately have certain images that pop into your head.
Sure.
But Vance is really trying to kind of reclaim that term.
Yeah, he's pushing back against that.
Yeah.
That kind of dismissive use of it as a simple insult. He's talking about his neighbors, his family.
Yeah.
He's really trying to show the depth of this identity.
Right. And this is a real group of people.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not just some caricature.
Exactly.
These are people with a rich history.
Right.
And a culture and, struggles.
And a shared heritage, too.
Right.
He talks a lot about the Ulster Scots heritage.
Right.
The generations of working class struggle.
Right. And I think that's something that often gets missed.
Totally.
When people kind of just throw around that term hillbilly.
It's like a shorthand that misses all of the nuance.
Exactly.
All of the
complexity.
Yeah, the complexities of their lives.
Yeah. And so he uses his own grandparents' story as kind of a starting point.
Right. He uses his own family history as a way to illustrate these broader trends.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, they moved from Jackson, Kentucky to Middletown, Ohio.
Right.
Looking for a better life. Right.
That classic American dream.
Right. Exactly.
The idea of upward mobility.
Yeah. But it sounds like it wasn't, all sunshine and roses.
No, definitely not.
They faced a lot of challenges along the way.
They did. There was culture shock, definitely.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And just, the challenges of adapting to a whole new environment.
Right.
And Vance really paints this picture of his grandparents, Mama and Papa.
Right.
These larger-than-life personalities.
I love that he calls them that.
Right.
Larger than life.
Larger than life. And they could be incredibly loving and supportive.
Right.
But also they had this very volatile relationship.
Oh, wow.
Vance even talks about Papa's violent outbursts.
Wow. So that's kind of setting the stage for kind of the environment that he grew up in.
Exactly. It shapes his whole worldview.
Yeah, for sure.
The way he sees the world, the way he sees relationships.
And, thinking about, Mama, she had this really strong sense of justice.
Yeah, she really did.
She wanted to be a lawyer for children's rights.
She had this dream of becoming a lawyer, but never had the opportunity to pursue that.
Yeah, and it makes you think, what could she have accomplished?
What if she'd had the resources, the support to really, fulfill that potential?
Yeah, that unrealized potential.
Right.
I mean, how many people are there like that out there?
Exactly. It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
And, speaking of potential, Vance talks about Middletown as this place that had so much promise when he was a kid. Right. But when he came back from serving in the military, he saw a very different picture.
It wasn't the same.
It wasn't the same. The downtown was deserted. The shopping center he remembers was empty.
Wow.
And he really connects this decline to those larger economic shifts we were talking about.
Right. Globalization, the loss of industrial jobs.
Exactly.
So it's not just a personal thing.
No.
It's really about these larger forces that are shaping.
Absolutely. It's about the forces that are shaping entire communities.
Exactly.
Not just individual lives.
Yeah, and he really ties the fate of Middletown to this company, Armco Steel.
Right. Armco was like the heart of Middletown.
Yeah, that was the big employer.
The major employer provided stable, well-paying jobs for generations.
Yeah, my grandpa worked in a steel mill too.
Oh, really?
So I kind of get it.
You understand that?
Yeah, it's not just about the job.
Right.
It's about the whole identity of the town.
It's about a way of life.
Yeah.
And then Armco merged with Kawasaki, a Japanese firm.
Oh, wow.
And that really sent shockwaves through the community. It was this huge symbol of the world changing in ways that they felt like they couldn't control.
Yeah, and I imagine for a lot of those folks who had, fought in World War II, it must have been especially jarring.
Absolutely. There was a lot of cultural tension this unease about a foreign company taking over this American institution.
Yeah, you can just imagine those conversations happening.
Right.
Around dinner tables.
Around dinner tables, in the bars, everywhere.
But people adapted.
They did. They adapted. And it's interesting how this shift also impacted aspirations.
Oh, how so?
Well, Vance talks about how parents, even those who worked in the mill, started encouraging their kids to go to college to get an education.
Oh, so it's like the factory job wasn't seen as
not the golden ticket anymore.
Yeah, not the guaranteed path to success.
Exactly. The American dream itself was changing.
Yeah, and so you have this backdrop of like economic uncertainty, these changing aspirations, and then on top of that, Vance talks about his own family life.
Yeah, this is where the book gets really personal.
Okay.
He doesn't shy away from the difficult stuff.
Yeah.
He talks about multiple father figures, addiction, domestic violence.
Wow, heavy stuff.
Yeah, heavy stuff. And he doesn't sugarcoat it.
So, we talked about his grandparents and how their relationship was pretty intense.
Right.
But it sounds like his own childhood was just as unstable.
Yeah, it really was. He shares these vivid anecdotes, like the Christmas tree incident.
Oh, yeah.
Where his mother tries to burn down the house.
Oh, my God.
Or his father's drunken outbursts.
Wow, so
these are really formative experiences that shape him.
Yeah, and these aren't just isolated incidents.
No, these are connected to broader social trends that were impacting families like his all across the country.
So it's like his story is a reflection of these larger forces.
Exactly. Rising divorce rates, single-parent households, the opioid epidemic.
Right. All of these things are playing a role.
Absolutely. And then there's the role of religion in his life.
Right.
He describes this really interesting contrast between his grandmother's very personal faith and his father's more rigid, judgmental evangelicalism.
So two very different
worlds of belief.
Okay.
Mama was suspicious of organized religion.
Yeah?
Even though she donated generously to certain churches back in Kentucky.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the pastors she supported was this Reverend Donald Eisen, who Vance describes as looking just like Max von Sydow.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
The priest from The Exorcist.
The priest from The Exorcist.
That's such a vivid image.
Right.
Like, what's he trying to say with that?
It really makes you think about the power of these religious figures.
Right, and like the role that they played in these communities.
Exactly. And then you have Vance's father, who's shaped by this much more anxious, almost apocalyptic brand of evangelicalism.
Like that fire and brimstone kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Like the world is ending kind of vibe.
So it's like everything's a threat.
Right.
Everything's a sign.
Yeah, and it creates this sense of persecution.
Right, like the world is against us.
Exactly. And it shapes Vance's worldview.
Yeah.
In a really profound way.
And so out of all of this, he decides to join the Marines.
Yeah, big shift, right?
Yeah, huge shift. Why?
Well, he talks about needing structure.
Okay.
Discipline.
Yeah.
A sense of purpose.
And was it just about escaping his problems, or was there something more to it?
It was definitely a way to break free from the cycle of instability.
Okay.
But he also talks about the sense of duty.
Right.
This belief that serving his country was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and that's something that's really valued in his community.
Absolutely. Patriotism, military service.
Yeah, it's ingrained
in the culture.
And, he really goes through a transformation in the Marines.
He does. It's like he goes through a baptism by fire.
Okay.
The grueling training, the discipline, the camaraderie.
Yeah.
It really changes him.
And so he comes back from the Marines, a changed man.
A changed man with a new perspective.
Yeah.
And that leads him to higher education.
Okay, so now he's venturing into a whole new world.
A whole new world. A world that most people in his community never even considered.
Right. And what's that like for him?
It's a real culture clash.
I bet.
He talks about feeling like an outsider.
Okay.
Not having the same social or cultural capital as his peers.
Like what? Give me an example.
He talks about not knowing how to dress for an interview.
Oh, no.
Or understanding the unspoken rules of academia.
So he's got the brains.
He's got the brains.
He's served his country.
He's got the drive.
But he's still hitting these barriers.
Invisible barriers.
Like these social and cultural barriers.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that intelligence and hard work aren't always enough.
So how does he manage to succeed?
That's where things get really interesting. He has to figure it out as he goes along.
Okay.
But luckily, he finds some mentors who help him navigate this new world.
So those mentors are key.
They're absolutely crucial. They provide guidance, support,
right,
and they open doors for him.
And this is where we start to see this idea of social capital. come into play.
Exactly. Social capital, those networks and connections,
Right.
that can make all the difference.
And Vance even says that he wouldn't have gotten certain internships or clerkships without those connections.
Without those recommendations and guidance from his mentor.
So it's not just about working hard.
It's not just about working hard.
It's about who you know.
It's about who you know.
It's about those opportunities that are presented to you.
Exactly. And that's something that Vance really starts to understand as he moves further away from his working class roots.
Yeah, and it makes you think about the systemic inequalities that are built into our society.
It does. It raises these big questions about social mobility and the perpetuation of inequality.
And it sounds like Vance is starting to grapple with those issues.
He is. He's wrestling with these complex ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes his story so compelling.
Absolutely. It's not a simple narrative.
Right.
It's a nuanced look at a very complex reality.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Maybe we should take a pause.
Okay.
And come back to this in part 2.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more.
Me too.
So, we were talking about those larger forces, right, and how they impact individual lives.
Right, like the economic shifts.
Exactly. And Vance actually highlights this really well.
Okay.
Through this seemingly mundane summer job he had.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at a grocery store called Dillman's.
Okay. A grocery store.
Doesn't sound that exciting, right?
Not exactly front page news.
But for Vance, it was this eye-opening experience.
How so?
Well, he starts observing people, like really observing them.
Okay.
How they shop, what they buy, their interactions with the cashiers.
Okay.
And he even sees how some folks are manipulating the welfare system.
Oh, wow. Like what? Give me an example.
He talks about people using food stamps to buy soda and then selling it for cash.
Wow.
To buy cigarettes and alcohol.
Wow, so they're kind of gaming the system.
Yeah, and it really makes him question the whole thing.
I bet, especially because, he and his family are struggling.
Exactly. They're barely making ends meet.
Right.
And he's seeing this happening around him.
It's like a slap in the face almost.
Right. It creates this cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. You're working hard.
You're playing by the rules.
Right. And it seems like other people are, taking advantage.
Right. And it's a complex issue.
It is.
That touches on class perceptions of poverty.
And like, how effective are these safety nets really?
Exactly. Vance doesn't offer any easy answers.
Right.
But he presents these observations and lets the reader kind of grapple with them.
And it sounds like it was a really formative experience for him.
Oh, absolutely. Especially as he's trying to understand the political landscape.
Right, like how people are voting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even draws a connection between this experience and the shift he saw in white working class voters leaning towards Nixon.
Oh, wow. Back in the 70s.
Back in the 70s. So there was this sense.
There's this feeling that their hard work was being taken advantage of.
Okay.
That they were footing the bill for people who weren't working.
So it's like that resentment was already building back then.
Exactly. It was this sense of being overlooked by the elites.
Right. And hasn't that sentiment only grown stronger in recent years?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, Vance's book really offers this valuable insight into the frustrations and anxieties that have fueled a lot of these populist movements.
Right. Both in the past and present. Exactly. But amidst all of this economic struggle and political disillusionment, Vance also shows this incredible sense of community.
Okay.
This fierce loyalty to family that persists.
It's like that saying, blood is thicker than water.
Right. Even when times are tough, family sticks together.
They have each other's backs.
Exactly. And Vance talks about this pervasive sense of hopelessness that settled over his community.
Right. The visible signs of decay.
The drug addiction, the violence.
It's tough.
It's tough, but he also highlights those small acts of kindness.
Okay.
Neighbors helping each other, mama's unwavering support.
So even in those dark times?
Even in the darkest of times, there's that flicker of hope.
Right, that human connection.
That human connection that keeps people going.
And he gives a really powerful example.
What's that?
Of his grandmother taking care of a neighbor's young son.
Oh, yeah. He talks about how this kid was basically neglected by his own mother.
And Mama stepped in.
Mama stepped in. She took him under her wing.
Even though she had her own problems to deal with.
Exactly. She didn't have much, but she gave what she could.
And it's those kind of actions that really speak volumes.
Right. It's not about preaching.
Yeah.
It's about doing.
It's about showing up for people.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that pivotal moment in Vance's life.
His decision to join the Marines.
Right. We talked about how it was a turning point.
Yeah. But it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing, was it?
No. It was a carefully considered decision.
Okay. So what led up to that?
Well, he was looking for a way to break free from that cycle of instability.
Okay.
He wanted purpose.
Yeah.
He needed financial stability.
Right, and the military offered all of that.
Exactly. And of course, there was also that sense of duty.
Right, like serving his country.
Which was a deeply held value in his community.
Yeah, and he talks about the transformation he went through in the Marines.
Right, the grueling training, the discipline.
Yeah.
But also the camaraderie and the pride.
It's like he discovered a strength he didn't know he had.
Exactly. The Marines pushed him to his limits, forced him to confront his self-doubt.
And instilled that confidence.
And discipline.
That would shape his future.
Absolutely. And, we talked about how the book gets really raw and honest.
Yeah.
There's this one scene that really stands out to me.
Okay, tell me about it.
It's when Vance returns from Iraq.
Okay.
And he visits Mama's grave.
Oh, wow.
He talks about being overwhelmed with emotion,
Yeah.
realizing how much he'd taken for granted.
Like what?
Comforts of home, his family's support.
Yeah.
The opportunities that were now within his reach.
It's like he's seeing everything with new eyes.
Exactly. It's this moment of profound gratitude.
Yeah.
But also this deep sense of loss.
And it's that clarity.
And new perspective.
That propels him into higher education.
Right. A world that was so unfamiliar to him.
A world that seemed almost impossible to navigate.
And he faces a lot of challenges.
Like what?
Well, he talks about feeling like an outsider.
Okay.
Lacking those social and cultural cues.
Like what? Give me an example.
He shows up for an interview in this oversized suit.
Oh, no.
He's struggling to understand the significance of all these academic rituals.
So he's got the brains.
He's got the drive.
He served his country.
He's determined to succeed.
But he's still hitting those invisible barriers.
Those invisible barriers, those unspoken rules.
It's frustrating, but I can also see the humor in it.
Oh, definitely. Vance doesn't take himself too seriously.
Right, he can laugh at himself.
Which makes him all the more relatable.
Exactly. But despite those challenges...
He excels academically.
Wow.
He's driven.
Yeah.
He's hungry for knowledge.
And maybe there's that part of him that wants to escape
those limitations.
Of his background.
Prove everyone wrong.
And that's where the mentors come in again.
Right.
Yeah.
Those guiding figures who see his potential.
Yeah.
Offer him valuable advice.
And he starts to understand the power of social capital.
Those networks and connections that open doors.
And he even admits that he wouldn't have gotten those internships or clerkships without that support.
Without those recommendations.
It's like he's starting to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, he's realizing that success isn't just about individual effort.
Right.
It's about those connections.
With opportunity.
That can give you a leg up.
And it leads him to reflect on those systemic inequalities.
Right, those barriers that make upward mobility so much harder for some.
Than others.
He contrasts his experiences with those of his peers back in Middletown.
Yeah.
And he realizes that not everyone has access to the same networks.
The same opportunities.
And that's a powerful realization.
It is. It could have led him down a path of disillusionment.
Resentment, even.
But it sounds like he takes a different route.
He does. Despite acknowledging those barriers, he doesn't fall into despair.
So what does he do?
He emphasizes personal responsibility.
Okay.
Making the most of the opportunities you have.
Right.
Breaking free from those cycles of dysfunction.
So it's not about ignoring the systemic issues.
No, it's about finding ways to overcome them.
Both individually.
And collectively.
And he finds examples of this in his own family.
He does. He talks about his cousin Gail.
Okay.
A single mother who built a successful life for herself and her kids.
Wow. Despite all the challenges.
Despite incredible hardship.
So it's a message of hope.
It is. It shows that even when the odds are stacked against you, it's still possible to break through.
But it also raises some questions.
Like
how do we balance that personal responsibility with the reality of those systemic barriers?
It's a tough question.
It is. And what can we do as a society to create more opportunities for everyone?
Regardless of their background.
That's the million-dollar question.
And I think those are the big questions that Vance leaves us grappling with.
Yeah, it's not about simple answers.
It's about engaging with those complexities.
And maybe that's the first step towards finding solutions.
Exactly.
You know, we've talked a lot about those systemic issues and the challenges that people face.
Yes.
But one of the things that really struck me about Vance's story is how open he is about his own struggles.
Yeah, he's really honest.
Right. He doesn't shy away from his flaws.
No, he owns them.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes him so relatable.
Totally.
You know, he's not trying to present himself as some perfect role model.
No, he's a real person.
Yeah, with real problems.
Right. And I think that's refreshing.
It is, because so often we see these stories of success
Right.
And it's like they just gloss over all the hard parts.
They make it seem so easy.
Yeah, and it's not easy.
It's not easy for anyone.
Right, and Vance is really upfront about that.
Yeah, and he even compares himself to a turtle.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Retreating into his shell.
At the first sign of conflict.
It's such a vivid image.
It is, and it's like he's acknowledging that tendency to kind of shut down.
Right, to withdraw.
When things get tough.
And he connects that to his upbringing.
Oh, right. Because he grew up in this environment.
Exactly, where conflict was constant.
Right.
And instability was the norm.
And so it's like he learned to protect himself.
Yeah. Right, to build those walls up.
Yeah. And it makes sense, but it also makes it hard to form healthy relationships.
Absolutely, it affects everything.
Yeah. And he talks about this big fight he had with his girlfriend, Usha.
Right after a job interview.
Yeah, it didn't go so well.
And he kind of lashes out at her.
Yeah, he accuses her of making excuses for him.
Yeah, it's a really intense moment.
It is. And it's like he's projecting his own insecurities.
Onto her.
Right.
But it's also a turning point for him.
Oh, how so?
Because he recognizes how destructive his behavior was.
Okay.
And he starts to examine those root causes.
And he talks about those adverse childhood experiences.
ACEs.
Right, those traumatic events that can have long-lasting effects.
Yeah, it's like those wounds we carry with us.
And it's not just him, right?
No, it's so many people.
Especially in working-class communities.
Where those stressors are often more prevalent.
And it makes you think about the ripple effects.
Right, how trauma can impact everything.
Our relationships, our health, our ability to succeed.
It's a lot to carry.
It is, but despite all of that,
yeah,
Vance's story is ultimately a story of hope.
It is. He doesn't just dwell on the negative.
No, he highlights those moments of resilience.
The people who overcame incredible obstacles.
And I think that's really important.
It gives us something to hold on to.
Right. It reminds us that even when things seem impossible,
there's always hope.
There's always a way forward.
And he talks about the importance of support systems.
Right. Having people you can rely on.
The role of mentors, those guiding figures.
And the power of taking ownership of your choices.
Not just blaming others.
Right, but recognizing that you have agency.
That you can make changes in your life.
Yeah, and he tells the story of his cousin Gail.
Right. The single mother who created a stable home for her kids.
Despite incredible hardship.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
It really is. It's inspiring.
And it shows that we're capable of so much more
Than we often give ourselves credit for.
Yeah. And it's not just about individual grit. It's also about community support.
Having people who believe in you.
Who are there to help you through tough times.
So it's this combination of personal responsibility
and social support
that can make a real difference.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, it takes a village.
It does. And maybe it takes a village not just to raise a child,
but to help us all reach our full potential.
I love that. And I think that's really what Vance is trying to get at.
Yeah, it's not an either-or situation.
It's about finding that balance
between individual effort
and recognizing the role that society plays
in shaping our opportunities.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Hillbilly Elegy,
okay,
what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, I think it's a book that challenges us to look beyond stereotypes.
Right.
To see the complexity.
This is the white working class experience.
To understand their struggles.
Systemic barriers.
But also their resilience.
Their strengths.
And it pushes us to examine our own biases.
Right. To recognize the power of social capital.
Community support. And to really consider how we can all contribute to a more equitable society.
Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
We are. And I think Vance leaves us with this really powerful question.
What's that?
What can we do to create a world where more people have the chance to thrive?
Regardless of their background.
Exactly. And I think that's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
It is. It's a challenge.
It is.
But it's a challenge worth taking on.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive.
I agree. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep exploring.